Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi şrah li sadri ve yessir li emri. Ve ehlul ukdeten min lisani yefkahu kavli. Selamünaleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuh. Inshallah, we will continue with this second session. And for the sake of tying back to the first session. So the first session, alhamdulillah, it was very beneficial, at least for me. So they gave us a very, I would say, interesting, but also very useful framework to work on, which is they ask the question, when we see an event of, that looks like injustice or is injustice, we see something and we have these feelings, we have some experience that we are going through, and they ask the question, why do you think, or how do you think you go through this experience? How do you have these feelings, right? So if you do an injustice in front of this TV, the assumption is that the TV will not have any feeling against it. But when I go through injustice, I have these feelings. I don't like it. I have this feeling of acting against it. And they ask, how and where did this feeling come from? And they start to listen it and then try to understand it. So I like to hold on this, the idea that why I have this experience, why I have this feeling, as they beautifully discussed. We will use the same approach, but we will come to there, inshallah. I like to say something like a tiny thing before going there. So when we see this injustice happening in front of us, we have this, again, the feeling or the entire package of experience. It's not just feelings, right? What we see, how we think, and so on and so forth. And one way of interpreting this experience is also that we are told that I have to act against it. I don't like it. Right? Whoever is putting this feeling in me, telling me that I don't like this act, and I want to teach you that you should be part of justice. I want you to learn this. You don't like injustice either. That's the training I'm going through. So in the first session, we learned that one part of it is whoever is doing the unjust, we should be reaching out and being part of their training as well, right? There is another maybe aspect of it, which is it is part of our training as well. So I should learn firsthand that injustice is not good. And how I learned that? By preventing it. So I should be part of prevention as well. And understandably, in the first session, we didn't touch upon that second part much. Why? The simple answer was they were afraid. They were afraid about talking about this. Right? Especially the examples are being about Gaza, the other country, we cannot even pronounce the name, right? We are afraid even talk about that we have to be part of the preventing injustice. And not because, as they like a beautifully taught us, not because we want to punish them. Because one thing, we should be part of their training. And also I should learn firsthand that injustice is not good. And prevention is part of the training. So the question, of course, is why we are afraid, right? The Zarar with his all military training, right? All his muscles that he was implicitly referring to, through talking about his brother and so on and so forth. Why still we are afraid? So that's the question we want to tackle in this session, inshallah. Of course, these global events that are taking place right now is just one example. Because when it comes to fear, our lives are full of fear anyway. We genuinely, we don't need any, the evil group of people trying to destroy another group of people. We don't need to see that to be afraid. Our lives are full of fear. We will, inshallah, go through some examples. But the question, of course, how and why we have this feeling, fear. Well, that's the first question we want to touch upon. And then, inshallah, next, maybe we can talk more about it, what it tells us. How Quran, the revelation, can shed light on this mysterious feeling. Because to me, it's very mysterious. We will, inshallah, touch upon it. It's very interesting, the feeling of fear. And how revelation will, inshallah, guide us to better understand it. But let's first try to answer the question why Zarar was afraid of, speaking of a certain aspect of injustice. Let's start from there. Of course, I'm kidding, because, if you really carefully listen, what we discussed about the injustice, I think, at least personally, it helped me a lot to cure, the biggest burden I have when I see injustice, which is not seeing a wisdom there. But anyway, let's start with why we have this fear, maybe, right? And let's try to benefit from Quran.
Sure. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بلى من أسلم وجهه لله وهو محسن فله أجره عند ربه ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. Yes, on the contrary, whoever submits his face in Islam to Allah while being a doer of good will have his reward with his Lord, and no fear will there be concerning them, nor will they grieve.
So, like, this sounds like at least reads like a very simple ayah. When we first read, it says, whoever submits or turns his face, or whatever they know about their Lord, do it, practice it in their life. This is, the aslama, the submission part. If you are among those, if you are, let's put it in a very short form, if you are a believer, right, and if you are living it in your life, and then you are doing a good deed, then you will not have fear or anxiety or maybe the worries for future, right? So it becomes interesting when we take it and read it from maybe in the reverse order. The ayah also suggesting that you have your fears because you do not submit. You have your fears because you are not doing good deed, or you are not part of the Hasan. You are not part of the beauty of the creation. But this is kind of implied if you read it from the other way around, right? Because it says, if you are among those, there's no fear for you. So for me, there is fear, obviously. For her, I see her eyes that full of fear, right? He cannot even, smile comfortably because of his fears. So we are full of fears, and the ayah says, maybe there is something about the condition. So the Quran, when we read Quran, it's always a guidance for us. Like, this is how Quran describes itself to us. So we shouldn't read Quran to get some information. We should read it to get let's say, a solution, a cure for our diseases. And when I read this ayah in this way, this ayah telling me, okay, Birkan, let's check whether you turn your face to the Creator, whether you see Creator everywhere or not. And then maybe this is the reason you have these fears. Okay? So this is the first aspect we want to touch upon.
And to reiterate, like I have very, maybe basic fears relating to things like losing my job, failing my classes, losing family members. And so is this, a result of my lack of submission? Is my Islam, my submission not good enough, to prevent these sort of fears? Is the ideal Muslim, does he not have such fears in the first place?
So, yeah, like it sounds very almost aggressive to say someone like you have fears because you have problem with your belief, right? And at least like when I read this ayah, this is not how I take it. It's more like, okay, Birkan, since you are here, like you are visiting your, I don't know, psychiatrist, right? You have your problem. And he's telling you, okay, since you are here, I'm not here to blame you. But since you are here, let's, have a look whether you see the creation this way or that way. And in the first session, again, they mentioned these choices, right? And it always boils down to two paths. So when we look at the creation, we see it either in one way. So they said, for instance, the survival of fittest, clashes of different forces, and we're trying to survive in between, or we see it different way, right? And so before even coming to, the Islam, maybe we should take one step before and talk about a little bit Iman. So the fear is like when you study your feeling, the fear, it's always tied to somehow, one way or another, to insecurity, right? If you feel secure, you don't have fear. If you are feeling insecure, you have the fear. I mean, interesting, the Iman, when you look at the meaning of the word itself, it means security. You feel peace when you have Iman. It's not belief. Like this is how we translate, or faith. Like these are the words that we borrowed from other cultures. In Quranic wisdom, the Iman means feeling secure, being peaceful about what you are, who you are, and so on. So let's look from this perspective. The fear is insecurity. So let's go with an example. Who's from Egypt? I have to be careful. Is there anyone from Egypt? Okay. Yeah. Once I visit there, the Cairo. And so in Philadelphia, it's not that maybe orderly in terms of the traffic, like when you use the pedestrian walking. But if you've been in such a place like Cairo, it's something else. Like it's not traffic. Like there are all these roads, crossings, and from every direction, the cars are moving. There is no stopping. Like the cars moving in this direction, cars are moving that direction, cars also moving that direction and this direction as well. So it's theoretically impossible. Like from a, let's say, graph theoretical perspective, it's impossible. But practically it is there. Alhamdulillah, it's a miracle of, the God. It's the Muslim country. So probably this karama, like the God gave us. It's working, right? It's one way or another. And if you want to pass as a pedestrian, you have to be very careful. So here, for instance, the traffic lights are like there's a hand, it's a stop or walk. Some traffic lights shows the walking, the figure. There is a walking figure, and I'm not joking. The guy in the figure is running. Seriously, because you have to run, right? It's a suggestion, like you have to run if you are, the reasonable. So when you are there, you have this fear. Fear is there. Somebody going to hit me. And I guess it's so obvious why you have this fear. It's so reasonable, right? Because there is no order. When there is no order, you are fearful. And when we say order, it doesn't mean that there needs to be some laws or like a police and so on and so forth. It's like when you look at it, do you see how things work and how they work? What is the purpose? What is the wisdom? When you don't see it, you have this sense of insecurity. So another example maybe, the people, when they study why one nation is thriving economically versus another nation is not, right? Among many other, the explanations and so on and so forth, one of them is, in certain nations, like here, for instance, you securely make some investment on your ideas. Meaning, if you have a crazy idea, a new technology, you just find another, group of people like-minded, you make an investment, you start selling it, and you will earn the money, right? You will get your wealth. And look at these crazy, once upon a time, young people, the Zuckerberg and so on and so forth. They did their job one way or another. I mean, there are stories there, doesn't matter. But they get in return. So if you try to do it in another country, for instance, the country that I'm from, if you have a very good idea, you make the investment, you start earning money, and another group of people with a little bit more power, different kind of power than yours, may take over. If they not, government may think you are becoming a danger for prosperity of my people. So I will, we even have very nicely working laws for that. It's like a part of law. It's not, nothing is unlawful. They will say, you know what? I don't like you. I will assign someone as a CEO to your company, and I will take over your company. It's part of the law there. So if you are living in that country, you wouldn't even dare, like you wouldn't even bother making an investment yourself, right? So again, the reason is order. In one example, we see order, we are, not fearful. In another example, we don't see order and we are fearful. When there's no order, what we see is multiple forces clashing and trying to, they overcome each other. And we, ordinary people, getting crushed and then trying to survive. That's how we see life most of the times. For that reason, for instance, I'm afraid that I will be hit by a car and get killed. Another, the way I don't make any, let's say, the investments, I don't try to, translate my ideas into the products because I'm afraid, because I don't see order. So ayah here kind of telling me then, you have your fears or anxieties and so on, because one thing, you don't see order in the universe, right? You are afraid of, let's say, your children will become this way or that way, or say something against you, will not obey you, and so on and so forth. You are afraid because you don't see order in their creation. You don't see order between them and you. And then you're not practically also living this order in your life. When this is the case, Ayah says, you will be afraid of things. And you can apply this to anything. Who wants to share a fear of themselves? Anything. I'm afraid of, I don't know, let's say mouse, right? Mice. I see a mice there and I start screaming. Why? Because I think my precious life is without protection. Nobody protects it. I have to protect it. And this threat can end my life or at least cause me suffering. So I have to fight against this possibility.
So in my career, I am at a position where I don't have enough power and I need to watch out for what I speak up until I get the power. So I need to be quiet and nice and don't give any color or indicate what I am really, but just hide in there up until I become the strong one. But until that day, I better keep quiet.
Alhamdulillah, perfect example. Who else? Courageous people.
Courageous people talking about their fears.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I know.
No, I don't need the mic. I mean, I have many fears, right? I fear any situation in which I don't have complete control over. I fear my own anxieties. I fear not finding a job, right? I fear others not liking me as much as like I would like them to like me. So you know, it's as you said, kind of embedded in my everyday experience, right? And that fear can be sometimes, you know, fear of even one's own expectations, and whether those will be met in any way. There you go.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah, that's enough. Otherwise, we cannot. So yeah, like our poor brother Yusuf is so fearful in the workplace, like just like myself, like because everywhere I look, I see a big strategy going on, a politics, and I'm trying to locate myself in one location or another.
Even the president couldn't survive.
Right? Even the president of this, the beautiful university couldn't survive among all these task forces. So, and again, when we look very carefully, as you ask, we have these fears, how they are related to what is suggested here. I'm afraid in the workplace because, when I look, I see that my well-being, my future, my career, my salary is their hands. I see that. This is how I see. Right? If my boss doesn't like me, I'm fired, equals I'm out of money, equals I'm out of food, equals my wife probably will leave me, equals no happiness. This is how I see life. It's always, somebody can attack you anywhere, anytime. Because everything, it's their own, like acting on behalf of their own. Sorry, forgive my English, right? Nobody would stand for you. All we can do is try to use our weak power and try to survive. When a tiny creature that we cannot even see visited us, it's the entire globe. We were so fearful because this virus could end our lives, our precious lives, any moment. And all we could do, try to invent some vaccines and so on, and then distribute them without even properly test them, right? Oh, did I say that? Sorry. And then, deal with the side effects and so on and so forth. That's all we can do because we have limited power. Against this giant virus, we have just a limited power. When we see the life this way, I guess the most reasonable thing being fearful. I mean, you should be so fearful that you cannot even move. That's the just thing to do. And I am saying that, okay, Birkan, let's start from there. Let's start.
And so if the root of our fear is seeing the world in a very disorderly way, right? Independent agents, independent, everything is independent, working for itself. Everything can harm us, cause us pain. Would the cure be to see the world in an ordered way? And is there a way to do that?
Alhamdulillah. So, like when we talk about seeing the world this way or that way, it may sound like wishful thinking, like, oh, I choose to see the world this way today, and tomorrow I will try another way. Do you think it, fits to me? I tried this, the world view today. The point is, of course, is trying to maybe decipher first how I see world. And at least to me, it's so obvious that most of us, first and foremost, myself and then Yusuf, I know him, we see life in a very disorderly way. That's for sure. And then one person comes and calls himself a prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, and says, Birkan, I know that, you are fearful. I know that you live life this way. And do you know what is the cure? He says you should worship. Like do salah, for instance, just practically speaking. And I say, like, how? Then he starts explaining, like through his life, all these narrations and so on. And then he also gives us this beautiful revelation that we are reading. And it starts talking about, the worship. And what I mean with the worship is, first and foremost, asking yourself who you are, what you are. The first thing you realize that I am being created. So I have this existence. I am there. He's there. Let me touch it. Yeah, he's there. And I mean, he's there. This is very interesting. Like, this is the first thing I realized. He's being created, and I cannot find another explanation. There must be someone who is giving his existence. And within this journey of Iman, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but because we are not studying the Iman itself in this session, so I have to make these quick jumps, if you don't mind. But in my journey of Iman, I realized that whatever is there must be created by someone who has control over everything, who knows everything. Because everything in life, everything in this universe is tied to everything else. You cannot create one thing without knowing everything else, because everything fits the rest of the universe. So it is being created by all-knowing, all-wise, all-powerful, and so on and so forth. And then I start questioning whether the things in my life that I see as, the source of force, his boss, for instance, or this mouse that I'm so afraid, right? Or the virus and so on and so forth. I start asking questions, do they have such power? Because my claim was that they can create harm on me. And I asked the question, do they have this power? Do they have this knowledge? Do they have this will? So this is what I learned from worship, asking these questions. And then the same prophet says, here's your cure, Birkan. La ilaha illallah. Okay? Whatever is there in your life, look at it and ask the question whether they can create anything, whether they can harm or benefit you. And the La ilaha says, no, they cannot. And it's not just, again, wishful thinking. It's you asking that. Can my boss or his boss create success in my life? First, it seems like he can. But then when I look at his life, I realize he is also struggling with bigger politics. He cannot even satisfy or sustain his own wealth or his own success. If he cannot protect himself, how he's supposed to protect me? If he cannot guarantee his own place in the work, how he can guarantee my place? So I go through this journey, I start asking these questions, and I realize none of them can do this. No mouse, no wife, no husband, no children, no boss, no friends. They cannot, no virus, nothing. They can neither harm nor benefit us. Who is doing this then? Again, La ilaha illallah, right? When you aslama wajhahu lillahi, when you look at the things and what you see is Allah, nothing more. And Allah is like a cryptic word, right? By itself, it doesn't mean. It starts meaning something when you take it from part of this La ilaha illallah. Nothing in the universe, nothing in your life is doing it. Whatever is happening, your health, your success, your well-being, doesn't matter. None of them, none of these false idols that you were afraid of, the forces in your life, they cannot. And who? You ask the question, and when you realize it must be all powerful, all knowledgeable, all wise, and you say, oh, my life is not disorderly. Everything within is within in an order. When you realize this, and when you start your life in this way, whatever happens, it happens within an order because it's in his hands. It doesn't happen by itself. There are no all these conflicting parties. There is only one. When you realize this, the ayah says, there's no reason for you to be afraid of.
You say that, right? There's no reason to be afraid, but yet, you know, the fear or the harm doesn't disappear. The threat of harm doesn't disappear. These things, right? I can still lose my job, but instead of fearing my boss, right? My boss might fire me. Instead, it is, you know, Allah, right? The ultimate boss, you might say, right? So does that mean I'll just attribute the fear to him? Fear of all things to him. Is that how we should?
Inshallah, we will come to this at the very end. We will tie back to this very important question. Maybe first we should, you know, just highlight before we talk about the elephant in the room, why we are afraid, all these injustice and so on and so forth. Maybe we should just highlight one more thing. Our fears always boils down either to an harm or benefit. Like I'm afraid of one thing because I think it can harm me, or I'm afraid of something because I think, you know, it benefits me and I want to lose it. Right? It's always harm or benefit that it boils down. And as Quran says, with La ilaha illallah, nothing can benefit or harm you. So maybe we should, you know, this is like a summary of what we've been, what we will inshallah try to discuss throughout the day. But let's start with maybe some other examples. But this is like, again, the summary of the entire session maybe.
وكيف أخاف ما أشركتم ولا تخافون أنكم أشركتم بالله ما لم ينزل به عليكم سلطانا فأي الفريقين أحق بالأمن إن كنتم تعلمون. And how should I fear what you associate while you do not fear that which you have associated with Allah, that for which He has not sent down to you any authority? So which of the two parties has more right to security if you should know? And so it's easy, it might be easy to understand fear in this way. However, in our personal life,
Can you decipher the verse a little bit? It's too much you being
Yeah.
whatever.
Oh yeah, so you mean just read it in a very simple way. Okay. So the ayah is saying that if I'm not mistaken, the prophet Abraham is talking here. So the group of people coming and let's say threatening him with and the reason is he is trying to deliver this message. There is only one God and you should be worshiping him. And in return, when they threaten him, in return he says, I mean, you expect me to be afraid of the things that you invent. Like when he says, Ma lam yunazzil bihi alaykum sultan. It basically it means you invented that. Like he didn't send any authority there. He didn't say that, or there's no truth behind it. Like somebody comes and tells you, oh, Yusuf, be careful, like your father giving you a good advice. Yusuf, you should be very careful in workplace. You should be, trying to please your boss. Otherwise, he can fire you, right? He says. And Yusuf says, Daddy, I appreciate you, giving me advice, but this is something you invented. Like there's no such thing that boss can harm me, right? And he says, why should I be fearful of things that you are inventing while he does not send down to you any authority? And he says, you don't afraid of inventing such stuff, but you expect me being fearful of what you invented. And then, so which of the two parties, between you and me, who do you think have more peaceful and lived in security life? Right? His father, his father is a great man, just for the sake of example. His father is giving him advice, scaring him, right? And then Yusuf says, this is not true, father. I'm sorry. My boss cannot even sustain himself. So he cannot harm me. He cannot benefit me. And then father says, oh, but Yusuf, you are acting crazy. I mean, this is life. If you don't do that, you will be in insecurity. And he says, I mean, father, look at yourself. Who do you think is in security? I'm seeing life in a way that it is being created for me. An education, as they studied in the first session. This is how I see my life. It's an education, well-designed curriculum for me. Whatever happens with a qadr, with a measure. This is how I see my life. So I am in security. The one who is not in security, it's you. So this is how I understand ayah. And so the question was, sorry.
Right. The question is that as you know, as Muslims, right, we believe in the one God. We do not, verbally associate partners with God. So shouldn't we have security, right? But is that how we experience our own lives, right? Are we, secure individuals? Are we confident in what we do and in the expectations that we have of reality, right? So, we've been talking a lot about the situation in Gaza, right? Do we feel security in that? Do we feel secure in our cities? Philadelphia is a very dense urban environment. There are certain challenges that come with living in such a context. Maybe do we feel secure of speaking truth in our workplaces, or are we afraid of losing our jobs or being reprimanded? In our classes, on campus, in our homes. So despite being believers, we still feel insecure, and have constant threats, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And so how does that relate to this ayah which says that as believers, we should be more secure than unbelievers?
Alhamdulillah. And so the folks who are studying with us Quran, like we are studying Quran together, one thing we always say when we read such ayahs is that the ayah is talking about who? You, right? Like when ayah talks about the unbelievers, for instance, or kuffar, or munafiqun, and so on and so forth. I apologize for being frank, but the ayah is talking about me, not someone else. It's not just labeling me as kuffar and so on and so forth, but it's about the attitude. And the ayah is telling me that if you have this attitude, then you will end up with insecurity. So that's I guess the solution. Going back to your question, within all these circumstances and so on, as believers, do we feel secure? No, we don't. Because it doesn't matter whether we call ourselves one way or another. It's what we are is important. And it always boils down who can benefit and harm us. When we look at the situation, we think there are other parties in the creation that can benefit or harm us. This is what we are. So first, we have to face with this. We still, as ayah suggests, pretend that some certain forces, like our boss or a task force of PEN, can report us to somewhere and we can lose our job and so on and so forth. They can harm us, we believe. We see this injustice in front of us. People are dying, being bombed every day, and we cannot even raise our voice. Why? Because there are certain things that the creator, whoever is doing this, creating everything in front of us, didn't send down any authority, meaning when we look at them, when we look at our boss, we will see that he cannot or she cannot do anything to harm us. We will see this. They don't have any authority. No sultan was, sent down for them. But we keep telling ourselves, no, they do have.
They can fire us. What we need.
They can choose to fire us. That's the only thing they can do, right? I mean, there are situations, we know that. They may try to fire us. We end up not losing our job. Or sometimes we do end up losing our job. They can choose to fire us. We may end up being fired. That's true. But the question is not about whether I get this salary or that salary. I mean, if this is your goal, earning a certain salary, this is another thing without authority anyway. You think your salary can benefit you. That's the part of the fear. Right? When you are afraid of losing your job, it's not only about your boss, it's about your salary as well. Because you attributed a sultan to your salary as well. You think your salary can harm or benefit you. It doesn't end there as well. Okay, you lose your salary, so what? Right? You say, how about your health? Who will provide you with health? You can, if you cannot buy medicine. Oh, another thing without another authority. That you were thinking that the medicine or the health system is giving you health. So among all these, the false authorities, you end up having these fears. And this is how the fears that we have are being used as well. You are silenced against speaking, the truth and so on. For like, you cannot speak truth. Speaking against injustice, you are silenced. How? They show you the pictures of these false idols in your lives. How about losing your job? Your wife and children or your husband is waiting for food at home. How about your body? Who will sustain it? Let us sustain, right? This is the picture that we are in. So first we have to face with this. One aspect of these fears that we have, especially when it comes to, the life situations, like what is happening in part of the world, who's killing whom. Our fears is mostly they do, at least the part that looks at us. This is the most important part, right? I mean, I assume nobody here is concerned about what happens to others and so on. I mean, these bad guys. We are more concerned about ourselves. We do concern about them as well, especially with the punishment that they deserve. But the more important part is us. The guidance is for us. We have to be, trained. So when we look at our fears, the part that look at us is that we think things can harm or benefit us. And it doesn't change whether it's a political situation or a situation in, the family, between parents or between a child and parent, between animal and human being, doesn't matter. It's always, we have certain authorities in our lives and we are afraid of them. And people will use them, as in this story. They will show this picture of the authority to Abraham and expect him to be afraid. And he will say, if he is a reasonable one, he will say, I mean, why do you think I would be afraid of this? Aren't you afraid in your life that assuming that this thing that you are showing me has an authority? So that's the solution. There's a question maybe?
Jazakumullah khair. So I was thinking of just reflecting on what both of you have been saying. I fear something when I believe that it can harm me, right? And you're saying that certain things do not have the power to harm me in reality. But I guess I can only be sort of satisfied with that if we also discuss like what is harm, right? Like speaking of Ibrahim alayhi salam, like he started the fire. Was fire harmful to him, right? Is losing my job harmful to me? Is losing my health, is sickness a harm in my life? Because we're told certain things are harms, and so we fear them, but maybe what we see as harm is not necessarily harm when contextualized within this idea of the form.
Alhamdulillah, great point, and includes the answer as well. MashaAllah. No, this is good. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be able to, Would you like to say something? Okay. So, I think that's a great point. It's always boils down how you define yourself, your needs. And we human beings are needy beings. That's for sure. And our biggest need is the security. And when I say security, don't take it as just, being secure of robbery or something. It's the security with our, the existence, our life, being pleased with it, peaceful of it. That's the biggest need. And you can translate it in different ways. The one way, for instance, the Quran speaks of is the eternal, everlasting, the happiness and life. That's what we are in need of. Every time, I see my daughter growing up, I have this fear that she is getting closer to death. And I see it, even more obviously with myself. When I look at my skin, I see that I'm getting closer to death. This is my biggest worry, losing my life. And also, I'm so concerned when I don't see any wisdom in things. If there's no meaning, it's a burden for me. Right? It has to be for a reason. Otherwise, I cannot take it. These are our main needs, human needs. When we realize this, everything else becomes, the kind of secondary, sometimes even losing their meanings. Whether I'm a famous person or not, whether I'm the best mathematician, best musician, best wife, best husband, doesn't mean anything anymore when I face my reality. And these false authorities, it works in both ways, right? Sometimes to scare us, but sometimes to trick us with the false benefits. They will tell us that, oh, Birkan, I can make you famous. And I feel like, oh yeah, this is something I need, isn't it? But when I start questioning it, I say, no, this is not what I'm looking for. Who cares if I'm dying? Right? So defining harm, but at the same time benefit is at the center. Like we can spend, I don't know, hours for that. But if we are talking about our basic and not basic, but maybe most fundamental human needs, human desires, and so on, none of these examples, like being fired, being divorced, or your father kicking you out from home because you're not marrying the woman they want, or vice versa. You say, this is not the thing that I'm worried about. So to realize that, they don't have any authority, only possible when you realize what you are, your reality, what harms you.
So are we saying that we shouldn't have fear of apparent causes? Let's say, the fire that Ibrahim was thrown into, he shouldn't have been afraid of the fire. Or, we shouldn't be afraid of getting hit by a car crossing a busy road. Are we saying something similar to that?
So I guess the first part was about, one aspect of fear, which is, facing ourselves and realizing the way we see the world. And the way we see the world is disorder, right? Everything is against us, and we're trying to survive. That's our situation, and we have the fears. That was the first part. But there's another part, is now going back to what they beautifully touched upon in the first session, is looking our feeling of fear and trying to understand what is going on there. And maybe we can start reading studying this ayah that we see on the screen. I think it will help us.
الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. Those to whom the hypocrites said, indeed, the people have gathered against you, so fear them. But it merely increased them in faith. And they said, sufficient for us is Allah, and He is the best disposer of affairs.
So the one part that I like to, emphasize here is the part when it says, but it increased them in faith. What is it? فَزَادَهُمْ إِيمَانًا. So here we don't have khawf, but we have khushu instead. They are different, but we're not planning to discuss this. Khushu is more like maybe about the anxiety, being not, the feeling safe. Like it's interesting. It's also being like used for just the opposite as well. Like for instance, when you do your salah, doing it with khushu. Right? So anyway, let's, for the sake of discussion, let's take it as just fear. Somebody is, have the fear, like there's a threat. They say, okay, Birkan, you should be careful what you see in this retreat because there are all these unfamiliar faces and who knows how many of them part of some task forces, right? Maybe they are taking notes. They call themselves, we are from Princeton. Yeah. Who knows, right? There's a threat there. And against this threat, once Malcolm X said, when you are speaking to a crowd, it will be so naive to think that at least part of it is not your enemy. So anyway, going back to the first. Just kidding, of course. So, but you see, at this part of his life, he was seeing the life as clash of forces. The enemies, the allies, who supports whom, and so on and so forth. Then he goes to Hajj, and then everything he says changing. So anyway, so there's a threat, and then ayah says this threat, the fear, like you were asking, shouldn't be be afraid of, and so on. What am I going to do with this fear? So one way or another, we have these fears. Right? It's not, and most of the time, not most of the time, all the time, it's not us that control this fear. Like if you are afraid of mice, for instance, when you see a mouse, you are afraid. Like it's not like, there's a switch you turn on and then turn off. You cannot control it. The same way, when I have a threat, I have the fear. I'm afraid of losing my job, let's say. The ayah says, if you can see, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel, then this fear is there for a purpose, actually. It's not something that you should trying to get rid of it. You should listen it. You should try to understand what this feeling is telling us. And inshallah, this will be the second part. Like the first part, we studied one, that we have fears because we see life in a disorderly manner. And the cure is look at the life and question whether they have any authority or not. And when you realize that they don't have any authority, you will, have your peace. That was the first part. Now the second part is listening to your fears. The fear is not there to be get rid of. Okay? And most of the case, anyway, we cannot get rid of it. So that's the idea, inshallah, with the second part. And maybe we should now unpack, what I mean with this listening. Like the question is, for instance, when I see a mouse, there's a fear, and I should listen it, and then just, they stand on the chair and start screaming. Is that, what we mean? So so maybe I should give an example, like on the opposite direction. I was auditing a class, and a professor, she's talking about a psychology professor, psychopathology. She's talking about the fear and so on. And she's saying that, like, she's talking about how this feeling is evolved. And finally, she said the feeling is there so that we run away from predators. Yes. And she was giving all these examples, like all the details. When you fear, you try to get some mess out of your body, the name of this process, so that you can run away faster, right? So that was how she was reading this feeling of fear. And at the moment, I felt like, this is crazy, nothing more. Like how this feeling I have can be interpreted, can be listened, can be read in this way. Like this person must be someone who never feared in her life. Because if she did, she would know that the feeling of fear is so rich. Right? The one thing, it's, yes, it is about, being vigilant about your life, maybe trying to see the value of your precious life. That's one thing for sure. But at the same time, I realize, the same feeling, it reminds me my insecurity, as we studied in the first section, first part. This feeling, so-called primitive feeling, she was calling, is there to remind me my insecurity. So it's my teacher, actually. Tell me that, Birkan, you see life in this way, don't you? And I say, yes. I'm afraid of this animal or this thing. This feeling is telling me this, teaching me. And then the same feeling, it's a reminder of my weakness. With this feeling, I realize that I'm so weak, even a mouse can harm me. Even a virus can harm me. And it's a reality. I'm so weak. The feeling is telling me. The fear is telling me. So such a, a wise teacher. The same feeling is also a call for seeking refuge. Every time we feel fearful, afraid, we try to find somewhere to seek refuge, right? Surrender. When we are little children, it's our mom. When we are a little bit older, still mom for me. After 40, after the age of 40, you realize your mom cannot protect you anymore. So, but it's a call for seeking refuge. It's a call at the same time to finding the one who can protect you. That's the feeling of fear. So it's there for a purpose, not something that you get rid of. You should get rid of. Or it's not primitive at all. It's one of the richest feelings that we have. So to your answer, I think I'm a believer, but I still have this fear. The answer is, of course you will have your fear. That's the reason, you've been so far a believer. What does it mean to believe? It means being aware of your weakness, being aware that you need to be provided, being aware that you need protection. seeking refuge. This is Islam. This is Iman. So you are a believer because you have this teacher, the fear, I mean, partly at least, that's reminding you that. Otherwise, if you don't have any fear in life, if you are like this desk, you wouldn't even think that you need any protection. So you need this reminder. Oh, please go ahead. Do you mind?
Yeah.
Let's look closer.
But then doesn't that become contradictory to the first verse that we studied? The first verse was you basically, to paraphrase it, you're not submitting, which is why you have fear. You're saying you have fear because you're submitting. So it's like,
Alhamdulillah. No, that's a great point. So that's the reason at the very beginning I said, I don't take it as, Birkan, you are fearful because you are not a believer. It's rather telling me, the first ayah and this ayah altogether, they are telling me that this fear is there for a reason, to remind you one thing, that you see life in a disorderly way. It's a reminder. The fear is there for this reason. Another reason is that it's a reminder for you to realize your weaknesses, to realize you need protection, and so on and so forth. When you read the fear this way only, it becomes a meaningful creation in your life, and you are friend of your fear now. Feeling is still there, but you are not under burden now. You say that, oh, welcome, my teacher. I needed this reminder. Let's see what you will teach me. So when you read it this way, it becomes a source of your belief. Only when you read it this way, it will increase you in belief. Otherwise, it will just keep reminding you, Birkan, you are afraid because you see life disorderly. You see this life disorderly. And in return, you will say, yes, because life is disorderly. So you will start try to silence your fear. So that's the distinction between the two.
So then can we summarize it as fear is either something that repulses me from those false idols, or fear is something that invites me to my protector, to my creator. So this is the distinction.
Exactly. And that both of them together. Because in every moment, even if I'm a real believer, I still have some sense of false idols in my life. So I need fear, more or less, to remind me of this disorderly life that I live, the way I see, but at the same time, an invitation to find the one who can protect you, and also the one who can sustain you. So that's the reason I think this fear, the feeling of fear, is one of the richest, the experiences that we have.
And so coming back to the ayah, right? On the first reading, we might, read it as, oh, the people have gathered against you, and so fear them, right? So the Muslims are confronted with something to be feared, but immediately, instead of fearing them, it only increased them in faith. But we understand it's not an immediate reaction, right? Just the fear is more so the beginning of a process that will result in increased faith.
Inshallah, yeah, that's the idea. That's the call in Quran. It says, don't try to get rid of your fears, but rather use them, listen them, and they will take you to this journey in which your iman will be increased, and then so on. So it's a good thing. Maybe. And maybe one more example can make it maybe more like a clearer. When a child, for instance, is afraid, the first thing she does or he does is what? Running to, sorry, parents, right? To father, the merciful one. If she's afraid and she runs to her father. Daddy, daddy. And then what happens? Father hugs, please her, and she has what? Comfort. Before being afraid, she was just playing around and so on and so forth. But now she has comfort and happiness. Please. She's pleased with life, right? She's enjoying it. So this seemingly bad experience led her to something, even better than before. So that's what I mean with, increase in iman, in security. When you follow, but if she was acting in an, like an anarchist, she's afraid and she says, oh no, I don't need my parents. I will resolve it myself. I will take matters in my own hands. What would happen? She would fight against the thing that she's fearful and then probably hurt herself. Only when she realized that she's weak in the true sense, which is true for all of us. She realized that she's weak, she needs protection, and she's looking for someone who can protect. Only when she says, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil, and trying to find the best of disposers, then she finds the comfort. The same goes with us as well. When we try to take things in our own hands, which is, taught us as having dignity, the biggest, the lie of this society. When we take things in our own hands, we are not seeking for refuge. We are not facing our reality. And the fear there to make us face our reality. So maybe we should conclude with the last part.
إنما ذلكم الشيطان يخوف أولياءه فلا تخافوهم وخافوني إن كنتم مؤمنين. That is only Satan who frightens you of his supporters, so fear them not, but fear me, if you are indeed believers. And so we spoke of fear as something bad or an indication of something bad that we dislike. And it is an indication of checking our iman, right? Are we fearing Allah or only the causes? Are we associating partners with Allah through these fears? But in the Quran, it is prescribed to have fear, which is fear of Allah. And how should we understand this?
So I guess that would be maybe the most the important part. So we are going with the tradition and putting the most important part in the last few minutes. No, we have 15 minutes, right? So it's a long time. Alhamdulillah. So yeah, like we touched upon different aspects of the fear. One was, Zara, would you like to remind us, like what was the first part, like the first aspect of the fear we studied? And microphone.
Yes.
Was reading it incorrectly. So like the first verse that we studied was, if you submit truly to Allah and have Islam, then you should have no fear or no anxiety. So it's like reading it as you're not reading it as your teacher or reading it as something to fear.
Alhamdulillah. So yeah, we studied one aspect, which is when we see life in this like a disorderly manner, conflict of all these false idols and so on, we're trying to survive. Fear is there to warn us about this worldview, right? That was the first aspect. Another aspect we studied, would you like to remind us? Okay, how about you? Any volunteer? We studied this part. Another part was. Okay, Zarin, please.
I guess the other part, the way I understood it, was like an invitation to find, like, out of all of these like false things that I tend to fear, where is like the actual one who can like protect and sustain me, or who is the one who can protect and sustain me?
So, yeah, first we studied the fear as indication or reminder of our false idols disorder. And then the second was fear as our teacher, fear as a call to seek refuge, as a call to remind us our weakness, and so on. So these two things we studied. And the third thing is, so in Quran, it says, the fear, okay, don't fear, right? It's talking about Shaitan, his followers, and so on and so forth. Let me skip this part for the sake of the time. But whatever these false idols are there in your life, Quran says, don't fear them, but fear me. So the question is, how should I understand this? Like, what do you think of fearing Allah?
I mean, it might be the same as fearing like a fire. I might fear that I might burn myself, but Allah being the one who is the owner of the fire, he might use the fire to burn me in the same way. The fear is kind of the same. I don't know if that is the proper way of
Yeah, it's a good start. So fear of God, it's almost saying that, we studied things as, whether it can harm us or benefit. And this ayah is saying, just highlighting that there's nothing in your life that can harm or benefit you. So don't fear them means they cannot harm or benefit you. Why you are fearing them? And then adding that there's only one thing that can harm or benefit you, which is the one who creates you, which is the one who creates everything. So it's just like when we say fear Allah, it means there's only one thing, the Creator, can benefit you, can harm you, because only He has this power, knowledge, will, and so on. Just realizing that He's the only one who sustains me, who is the only one who educates me. And when I study this even more, just like our friends did in the first session, even when I think I am harmed, like there's injustice towards me, for instance, when I read it properly, I see that, even that is part of the training, is part of the mercy. So that's what it means, when we say the fear God. Realize that only He can harm or benefit you.
Does that also include, if I do something wrong, I will be punished? Is that encompassed within fearing God?
So I get the sense of responsibility, like when you say punish, let's take it as a sense of responsibility. I think it's part of it, definitely. Because, when we study fear the way we study it, like as a call for weakness, as a call for, reminder as a weakness, call for seeking refuge, call for facing yourself, and so on and so forth, the fear is not a primitive feeling anymore, right? It's a rich teacher. So when we take it this way, part of it also reminding us the responsibilities. When I act in an unjust way, I have this feeling of responsibility. So if you mean with the punishment, this feeling, yes, I do have it. So it is part of fear of God. But maybe more important, when when you associate it with the creator of everything, creator of yourself, the ones that you love, the order you see in the universe, and so on, it's, I guess, the better way to put it, that you are afraid of displeasing him. Because when you face yourself again, you realize that, the only way you have the peace in your life, when you do something that pleases the creator. And how you know that? With the enjoyment that is created in you, the satisfaction that is created in you. And you want to protect this. You don't want to lose this. So the fear of God, it has this responsibility part. It has this realization of only He can harm or benefit me. This is a realization, this is the truth. But at the same time, it has also this love component. That you don't want to lose the one that you love. You don't want to lose the one that you satisfy you, sustains you. The one that will give you the eternal life. That is there as well. So the fear is already very rich. Like even when we study it just as a human being and between people and so on. When we consider now fear of God, it becomes even richer. After, studying all these ayah and so on, I go back to this class. And if I didn't have the fear of speaking of the truth, I would tell my professor, how can you take such a rich experience and call it as the primitive feeling, racing against, away from the predators? How dare? So anyway, to sum up, maybe to conclude, the fear is there to remind us the mistakes we do when we look at the life, the false idols, the false authorities. It's a call for realizing our weaknesses, realizing that we need protection, we need existence. It's a call for seeking refuge. It's a call for finding the one who can protect us. And you can apply to everywhere. When you are afraid of your friends, when you speak the truth about what's happening in Gaza, right? In both ways. Like sometimes, you are afraid to tell your Muslim friends as well that part of this conflict, it's about nationalism, and I don't like it. When you say that, you are afraid. Because they may start calling you, maybe he's, part of them. Right? So there's all these different fears you have, not only against the other people, but your friends as well. Your fear tells you, Birkan, you are afraid because you think they can benefit or harm you. But at the same time, it's a call to find your Lord who can protect you, who can sustain you. And this way, if you do that, your iman will increase. Alhamdulillah, just on time. Maybe we can even take 1-2 questions.
Sure. Wow.
You already had your question. If there are others, I will give them priority. Yeah.
So I was thinking like Sister Aisha know that it's kind of passive, but then I realized like I want to tie the first section with this, and we dislike the injustice, so we have to read it. So we have to read that dislike fear, and what do I do with that feeling? And this one, we have also a fear that's a very rich feeling, and it's a messenger to us. And then we have to read it. Then I realized, oh, it has to be active actually. And I was thinking, I'm so passive in this. Then I realized to be open my eyes and always actively listening. Actually, that's the activity part I think we have to do.
So this the active passive thing, I think it's important. Like there's this narration which roughly translates into the giving hand is superior to the receiving hand. Right? It's usually used to understand to giving sadaqah. So the way, one way of to understand this is the giving sadaqah or this relationship is just to teach you who is the sustainer. Okay, it's not about the distribution of the wealth. So I keep telling this, but Islam is not there to teach us how to distribute wealth in a fairly fashion. It's there to teach us who is the owner of the wealth, and practical implication is the distribution of the wealth. But anyway, it teaches us who owns the money. The receiving hand learns it. Says that I had a need, and this lady who I don't even know, walking on the street, for some strange reason, she is giving me some money. And the person says, now I understood there is someone who listens to my needs and gives me my sustenance. The receiving hand learns this. The providing hands, giving hands, learns the same thing, but even in a better way. Because he has the first-hand, or in our example, she has the first-hand experience now. She is giving, and while giving, facing her reality that I don't even know where this feeling came from. I was just walking on the street, and for some reason, this feeling of helping someone else created in me. I'm not the owner of this feeling. I'm not even owner of this money. I just sat in front of the screen for 8 hours, and somebody put the money in front, like in my pocket. She knows this firsthand, even better than the receiving person, right? She knows that the owner of the wealth is the one who creates everything. So going back to our fear or injustice thing, we read our fears and we see injustice and we are afraid to act. And I start listening this fear, and it tells me that, Birkan, you are afraid to act because you are attributing false authority to certain people and so on and so forth. Now you received the message, you understood. But there is another way to better understand the message. Stand, act, and show them they don't have any authority. Now you will learn it firsthand. So giving hand is superior to the receiving hand. So if you act against injustice, not for the sake of punishing someone, but teaching yourself. So going back to the first ayah we studied, who is saved? The one who submits, the Aslam. You learned something, now submit to this. Submit to the truth that they don't have any authority. They will try to silence you. You say, I'm sorry, I will speak, because you don't have authority. Now you learn it better. Jazakallah. Any other questions? Otherwise, I will ask this gentleman again. Oh, okay. Okay then, maybe we can close. Jazakallah khairan. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Al-Fatiha. every time I start this dua, Subhanaka la ilma lana, and every time I have this thought in my mind, oh Birkan, you started right and you're getting it right, the dua. Every time I have this thought in my mind, my tongue slips. So, Alhamdulillah.